I don't want no oil, a spoil in my shoreline. I like fish much better than crud. I like birds and things, a-creeping and crawling. Won't trade no more oil for blood. The sun done give us all we need to make this country run. But that black demon oil's got us fussing and fighting, and I do believe it's time we was done. I don't want them nukes run by them kooks who think radioactivity is fun. No more three-headed frogs or kids with leukemia. Nuclear power ain't fit for a dog. The sun done give us all we need to make this country run. But that nuclear power's got us fussing and fighting, and I do believe it's time we was done. No nukes!
Good morning, Toledo, and good afternoon, Columbus, and hello to everyone in Bowling Green or listening on the internet wherever or whenever you may be. My name is Joseph D. DeMar, and I'm here with my habitually peripatetic co-host,
Rebecca Wood, who's not endorsing the sports teams. I just like the color.
Well, it's the season.
Right.
For the next hour, we're going to be looking at all things ecological in our wonderful program, For a Green Future. For a Green Future is a show where we talk about ecology and the environment, and we talk about them in the ways that they affect you, your wealth, your health, your happiness, and the wealth and health and happiness of your friends and family, and the health and happiness of all the creatures swimming around in the water, the bison and other critters living on the plains, the little mammals like monkeys and squirrels leaping from tree to tree in the forests, the snakes, bugs, and lizards scurrying across the sands of the deserts, or the caribou grazing on the tundra, because no matter which biome you're living in, we're all of us here living together on this Mexican layered dip-like planet called Earth. For the next 10 minutes or so, we're just going to talk about some of our ecological observations for the week.
Little known fact: the geologists actually refer to the layers of a certain layer of crust as the avocado layer.
Oh man!
Yeah.
I guess that would be the lava layer. Maybe?
Probably, yeah. I don't know. All the ingredients are fairly liquid in
Mexican
dip,
when you get
so,
deeper. In Mexican dip.
Right.
Well, then this week we have not just one, but two interviews for this for you. First, we have an interview with Kevin Camps. He's going to talk to us about the latest developments in the insane plan to reopen the Palisades nuclear reactor. A huge coalition is coming together to fight it.
Slap some duct tape on that baby and fire her up.
If only it were that simple. But we'll get the
That's
latest.
probably literally what they're going to do, though.
They're going to try.
Yeah.
There's some theoretical system where they reconstitute nuclear damaged concrete.
Oh.
And it's entirely theoretical at the moment.
This
But
sounds headache-inducing.
we'll get the latest from Kevin in a bit.
Okay.
After that, we have an interview with Stephanie C. from Roam Free Nation. We'll have to apologize to Stephanie. This interview was originally supposed to air on September 3rd, but as you might recall, we had a scheduling problem caused by the station, and we actually missed a week of broadcasting. That messed up our schedule, and her original interview was lost in that shuffle. If you want to hear that original interview with her, it's available on our podcast and YouTube channels. It's really good. She's really passionate about the bison and their plight at the moment. But today she'll be giving us an urgent update on the Yellowstone National Park Bison Management Plan. Yellowstone is currently accepting public comments on 3 different proposals for how or if they will be slaughtering bison into the future. We still have a little over a week to weigh in on the plans, so Stephanie will tell you why that's so important we do. After our 2 interviews, we'll hear from our unfailingly generous sponsors and patrons. Then it'll be time for Rebecca's report. Rebecca, where will you be taking us this week?
The Sinai Peninsula for Sukkot.
For Sukkot.
Yeah.
That sounds like an adventure.
Yes.
After we hear from Rebecca, it'll be ecological news from around the world. We've got some good news from California about battery storage, some interesting news about living fossil trees in Australia, and some bad news about climate change and the infrastructure that keeps your lights on. It seems like there's always a little bad news thrown into the mix. This is a pre-recorded show, recorded on Thursday the 28th, so you can't call in live, but you can call or text 419-973-5841, or send an email to foragreenfutureradio@gmail.com. We always love to hear from you, our listeners. This past week, we got some very positive feedback from a regular listener. Thanks so much for those words of encouragement. Now it's time for our short weekly update on the Canadian wildfires. This stat is as of September 22nd. The number of fires is about steady, and dropped only a little from 603 to 600. Out of control fires, in turn, are back up a little from 226 to 229. As always, more than 250,000 people have had to evacuate, and there have been 6 confirmed deaths. About 17.6 million hectares have burned. That's an area between the state of Florida and the state of Missouri. Still more than 6 times as much as for a regular fire season. So as Canada and so many other places continue to burn, the urgency of dealing with climate change by ending CO2 emissions becomes greater and greater. Unfortunately, the Biden administration seems to be focusing more and more on nuclear power as the solution. We've received a statement of intention from the U.S. Department of Energy, as presented by the Secretary of Energy, Jennifer Granholm, at the International Atomic Energy Agency's 2023 Ministerial Conference this past Monday. The IAEI was formed as an independent United Nations organization back in 1957 as a response to then-President Eisenhower's Atoms for Peace speech. And Secretary Granholm repeated some of those sentiments in her address, rightly condemning the use of nuclear material for weapons or for war. However, she then went on to profess the necessity of nuclear energy and commit the United States to support nuclear industry. The creation of the IAEI was necessary at a time where the Cold War was nearing its peak, and nuclear energy was viewed simultaneously as a potential world-ending threat and a tentative source of hope for the future of energy. But we know infinitely more about the dangers of nuclear material and radiation now. It has transitioned over the last 60 years from a source of theoretical oversight and regulation for the newly emerging public and private industry uses of atomic energy, as it was called then, to a staunch advocate for the use of nuclear power plants. This is a gathering of people who have enriched themselves by taking trillions from governments and ratepayers and giving back only brief moments of electricity, along with hundreds of thousands of years of radioactive poison. And unfortunately, the historical weight this organization has carried forward from that time does still have some impact. At this time, it is increasingly clear that we should have as little to do with sources of radiation as possible, as so showcased by that recent INWORKS study on the effects of low-dose exposure. But as Secretary Granholm tweeted on the 26th, the current narrative being pushed is that nuclear energy is required for decarbonization goals. The Biden administration has been pretty coy so far about revealing specific details about policy. It wants to give the impression that it's doing everything it can to fight global warming and reduce carbon pollution. But the Department of Energy is giving out nebulous tax credits for wind and solar at the same time that nuclear energy is getting tens of billions in cash. This narrative that Secretary Granholm has presented, that, quote, reaching our decarbonization goals depends on our embrace of nuclear energy, unquote, is just wrong. We're stalling our society's progression towards 100% clean, renewable energies like wind and solar by continuing to invest time and loads of money into intermediate energy solutions. There's never been a nuclear reactor project that finished on time or under budget. Even if there was, it takes decades to produce a so-called return on investment compared to a wind turbine, which could pay for itself in 12 years or less. Each source of information you can find to support the use of nuclear power is likely sponsored by the nuclear industry itself. In contrast, we'll provide some links for our podcast and YouTube of generations of researchers that have spent their professional careers crunching the numbers and proving that nuclear energy is unnecessary over and over again. This is the big lie that, now that it's out, needs to be repeated over and over again without being challenged until it becomes a new truth. Well, we here at For a Green Future are challenging that narrative. We've asked Secretary Granholm for an interview here on our show to try to defend the use of nuclear energy. We don't expect a response. It'd be nice. But the answer to a zero-emission energy economy is simple if we prioritize the future rather than the present and acknowledge that nuclear energy is not a solution worth pursuing. Secretary Granholm also mentioned nuclear fusion as a possibility for the future of energy in her remarks to the IAEA. Nuclear fusion, as opposed to our current use of nuclear fission, mimics the ability of our sun to forcibly change hydrogen into helium, releasing energy in the process. Nuclear fusion does still produce radiation, but theoretically is of a slightly different variety, with a dramatically reduced half-life. If the process of fusion can be made accessible and commercially viable, there's a lot of hope for a new energy revolution. And there have been some successful test cases this past year.
That was a plot of The Saint, if you remember, from the 90s with Val Kilmer.
I don't think I've seen that. I know Val
Kilmer. Thing
Kilmer.
about like some girl he was involved with had invented nuclear power or nuclear fusion and made it practical for, and everybody in Russia was freezing to death for some reason, and so he was going to save them all by protecting this girl that everyone was out to get.
The government was out to get the source of clean energy.
Yeah, probably, yeah. Something, I don't know.
There's some kind of parallel there with reality, but the honest answer...
Val Kilmer was still attractive at that point, also, I should point out.
Oh, some people, I'm sure,
Yeah.
still today.
Not so much now, but look who's talking.
The question of if nuclear fusion is good enough for a solution is the simple answer is that we don't know. It's been theoretical for decades, with promises that it's only a few years away that have existed for just as long. So we'll have to wait and see if the Biden administration's similar promises of having a working fusion reactor within 10 years will actually have any bearing in reality.
And also we know that it definitely what would work is wind and solar.
Yes, absolutely.
It actually will.
That's the proven technology.
Scientists. This is what the scientists think, actually. They will try to tell you otherwise, but this is what the scientists think.
And it's also clear that the more money that we spend on nuclear energy, the less we have on wind and solar projects.
Pretty much.
So that makes what they're doing up in Michigan at the Palisades nuclear power plant even more terrible. Here with more information on that topic is Kevin Camps. We're lucky to have him. Hello, and welcome back to For a Green Future. Could you please remind our listeners of your name and organization?
Hi, my name is Kevin Camps, and I serve as radioactive waste specialist at Beyond Nuclear.
So we're here to talk about recent developments with the Palisades nuclear reactor saga. There's a whole bunch of politicians who want to restart the reactor. Who is pushing for this? And is restarting it a bad idea?
To answer the second part, yeah, it's a really bad idea. And some of the leaders of the push to resurrect this zombie reactor would include the governor of the state of Michigan, Gretchen Whitmer, who's a Democrat, the Energy Secretary of the United States Department of Energy, Jennifer Granholm, who is a Democrat, and a former governor and a former attorney general of Michigan. The corporate player is Holtec International. The CEO is Krishna Singh. And it's utter madness. It's unprecedented. A reactor that's been permanently closed has never been resurrected. And I use Holtec's choice of words for what they're scheming here. But we can talk more about how dangerous this is.
Yes, your organization recently put together an amazing coalition that opposed this project. That group recently sent some letters to the government about the restart. Who is in your coalition, and what agencies received the letters that you sent out?
Yeah, so the first we heard of this restart scheme was when a reporter from the Detroit News called me in April of 2022 and let me know that the governor of Michigan had just floated this idea. And we were shocked and stunned. Since that time, we have written to Governor Whitmer a number of times. We've written to every single Michigan state legislator. We've written to the energy secretary several times. And these are thick letters. They are full of legal citations. And the most recent one just last week was to the energy secretary. And it had a lot to do with the National Environmental Policy Act. And the essence of it was saying to the energy secretary, look, the National Environmental Policy Act requires that you take a hard look at major federal actions. $1 billion loan guarantee to Holtec to restart a closed reactor is a major federal action with severe safety risks, not to mention pocketbook risks. And, this coalition, various groups have signed on to various letters because sometimes we have a very short turnaround time that we're working with.
Right.
But if you count up all the groups, it's into the hundreds. We had one letter to the governor that had 50 Michigan groups signed on to it, including the Sierra Club, which is the biggest environmental organization in the state of Michigan. The Sierra Club, to its credit, has been active in these efforts to try to stop the restart of Palisades.
Could you elaborate more on what's in these letters? You mentioned citations. I assume there's a lot of research that's been going on from your end to determine that this is a failed project from the start.
Yeah, so I do work for Beyond Nuclear, but I'm also on the board of directors of Don't Waste Michigan. And so Beyond Nuclear and Don't Waste Michigan have really been the tip of the spear on this coalition work. But like I said, we've had so much support. And so we have, invoked the National Environmental Policy Act. At times we invoke the Atomic Energy Act in terms of safety risks. NEPA is more on the environmental harm side. It's this schizophrenic division of things. Of course, environmental impacts are safety risks. Safety risks would probably involve environmental impacts, but we're working with the laws that exist. And one of the major points we've made this whole time, especially to the energy secretary, because they hold the purse strings on these major bailouts. I mean, the state, unfortunately, despite our efforts, has already approved $150 million in giveaways to Holtec for this restart scheme. But the Department of Energy, the lead proposal by Holtec right now is a $1 billion loan guarantee from the Department of Energy under the Inflation Reduction Act. But there's a second pot of money. It's called the Civil Nuclear Credits Program. It was established by the Bipartisan Infrastructure Law. It's a $1.2 billion bailout. Holtec got rejected on the latter more than once, I believe. I believe it's been rejected twice thus far. But the DOE's latest action was to rewrite their guidelines to make Palisades eligible. And the gist of our letters to the energy secretary about the 1.2 billion was Palisades is a closed reactor. The subsidy was created by Congress for operating reactors, and on the face of it, Palisades is not eligible. And so DOE's most recent action early this year was to rewrite its guidelines. And we wrote back again as a coalition immediately and said, the guidelines don't match the law. The guidelines are not legal. You can't do this. It's a closed reactor. So they're fudging all these definitions of closed and operating. It's very intentional. It's a form of fraud. There's various forms of fraud at play. I guess the question would then does it rise to the legal status of business fraud, of financial fraud, of wire fraud, mail fraud, because all these communications are, being made to the public. So it's a wild roller coaster ride we're on, and it's, right up on the edge of illegality. Not surprising given who Holtec is. I mean, Holtec has a history of bribery. They were implicated in a bribe in Alabama, and then they lied about it later to get $260 million from the state of New Jersey, where they're based. And they got the money, they got busted on the lie, and they've kept the money. It's really a case of Holtec CEO Krishna Singh is made of Teflon. He gets away with a lot of stuff. And, I guess that's why he's so emboldened with all the support from the state and federal governments, because they are fully behind this idea of Palisades.
Right.
So we're really up against some dark forces here.
Michigan's already given Holtec $150 million, like you said, and they're pushing for that 1.2 billion. But nuclear reactor projects often have a long history of going over budget. Isn't even that 1.2 billions likely to be just a small fraction of what it takes to get the reactor running, if it's even possible?
There's a lot of truth to that. The reason I mentioned Don't Waste Michigan is that Don't Waste Michigan has watchdog Palisades since its founding in the mid-1980s. And some of the founders had been watchdogging Palisades before the organization had been established. So my colleague, Michael Keegan with Don't Waste Michigan, has been a Palisades watchdog for over 40 years. And we've worked with people like in the local area here who were watchdogging Palisades before they broke ground to build it. And
Right.
Because we have so much institutional memory on our side, we know full well how dangerous Palisades is. And it gets to your question of, is that much money even enough? It is not enough, because Palisades has a number of pathways to meltdown. It is the most brittle reactor pressure vessel in the country and probably the world. And they do float ideas about how you can fix this neutron radiation embrittlement. They talk about annealing, which is using electricity to superheat the metal of the reactor pressure vessel. It's an experimental process. It's never really been done, not at scale. It's astronomically expensive. They just float it as a possible solution to shut us up. They floated it every blue moon over decades. And that's one pathway to meltdown. Another one is the steam generators have needed replacement for more than 2 decades. For the second time in the plant's history, there are few to no plants in this country that have replaced their steam generators twice. Once, yes, but not twice. And they haven't done it. They've not done the replacement. They've been running degraded steam generators for more than 20 years. They also have a degraded reactor vessel closure head, or lid. And folks in Northwest Ohio may remember that the nearest miss to a nuclear catastrophe since 3 Mile Island Unit 2 was the hole in the head fiasco at Davis-Besse near Toledo in 2002. So Palisades has been using a degraded lid for more than 20 years, even after the Davis-Besse fiasco brought this issue to people's attention, that this is a very serious safety matter. And the last pathway to meltdown I'll mention is it's called control rod drive mechanisms. They've had leaks on the seals since Palisades began operations in 1971. The first leakage was in 1972. They've had a plague of this problem ever since. And they actually had to close the reactor permanently, the previous owner, Entergy, on May 20th of 2022. It was 11 days earlier than they had planned to close because they sprung another control rod drive mechanism seal leak, and it made no sense to repair it just to operate for a few more days. So you've got some idea of all the major safety risks. There are more. The incredible thing, though, is even if Holtec, it wants a total of 300 million from the state. It's gotten half of that so far. If it gets another 2.2 billion from the feds, that's now $2.5 billion. It's really hard for me to wrap my head around this, but none of that money is required to be used to fix any of those problems. You'd think it would be. That's a lot of money. They've got big problems. What the money is for is to convince Holtec that this is worth doing. Stick it in their pocket, use it however they want. They may use some of it for some maintenance of Palisades. They don't plan to make any of these fixes, though. That would be expensive. And they're not into the money spending business. They're in the money making business. And so they're going to count on the Nuclear Regulatory Commission to just let them get away with it, just like the NRC let Entergy get away with it for the past 15 years, not fixing anything, and Consumers Energy before that. The NRC is a captured agency, and a part of the disconnect here is that the governor of Michigan, the state legislators, even the Department of Energy, they point to the NRC and they say, it's safe. The NRC says it's safe. The NRC is in bed with the company. And I mean, they have near misses all too often in this country. So we're kind of living on borrowed time.
You've already touched on Holtec not being quite all above the surface, so to speak, in a company-wide manner. And you've already mentioned the history of fraud. Is it possible that the entire endeavor is just a giant scam? It seems like you say the money is being sent to Holtec to entice them into receiving more money, and that, like you say, that doesn't sit well. Is it possible that they'll just take the money and then not do any work whatsoever?
It's an excellent question, and you remind me of a visit by Noam Chomsky to Bowling Green State University in the 1980s. And the major topic of discussion that day, even though it happened to fall on the very day that Davis Besse had a very serious safety incident, one of its steam generators was at risk of boiling dry, and it would be a short time till meltdown after you boil dry a steam generator. That's what happened when Chomsky visited Bowling Green. It was by coincidence that it happened then. But Noam Chomsky was talking about the Star Wars initiative of Reagan, the Strategic Defense Initiative at the time, which is probably the reason that nuclear weapons still exist in the world, because Reagan would not let go of Star Wars. Gorbachev and Reagan were on the brink of abolishing nuclear weapons in Iceland at the summit. And Gorbachev said, if you won't let go of Star Wars, I can't let go of my nuclear weapons. And the rest is history. Chomsky's point, one of them that he made at Bowling Green, I've heard from people who were there, who organized the event, was that it doesn't matter if Star Wars works. It's all about certain companies making a lot of money.
Right.
And, I've heard analysis by Dr. Ron Kramer here in Kalamazoo at Western Michigan University that Gorbachev should have just agreed to abolish nuclear weapons because everybody could tell Star Wars was not going to work. So let them spend the money of American taxpayer dollars. Let's abolish nuclear weapons. That was the mistake that Gorbachev made, unfortunately. So yes, it is entirely possible that Holtec could get $2.5 billion to restart Palisades and just not do it. And I'd be really happy with the outcome. But the waste of $2.5 billion, I mean, one example I give, I'm speaking to you from Kalamazoo, Michigan. We have a very serious homelessness crisis here right now. Not for the first time, and we're not unique in the country, but you know how much societal good can be done for $2.5 billion? This is hard-earned state and federal taxpayer money that's being given to a crooked criminal company. Let's hope they never restart. That would be very risky to the entire Great Lakes region. But in the meantime, that's our money. How can we, another update on Holtec, there's so much scandal plaguing this company. But in early June, its former chief financial officer, who had been fired by the company, filed a whistleblower protection lawsuit in the state of New Jersey, where Holtec is headquartered. His name is Kevin O'Rourke, and his allegation is that he was fired because he refused to lie for the company to Hyundai of South Korea, which is a nuclear company too. Hyundai has many divisions, including cars, I think, but they have a nuclear division. And unfortunately, Holtec convinced Hyundai to become a business partner, a major investor in Holtec's small modular reactor schemes. They want to build new reactors. They call them small modular reactors. They're 160 megawatts each electrical, which is smaller than, the current generation of reactors, but not entirely. Like Fermi Unit 1 in Monroe County, Michigan, that had the meltdown in 1966 was only like 60 or 70 megawatts electric. So these 160 megawatt electric small modular reactors are bigger than Fermi 1, and we almost lost Detroit because of that meltdown. So small doesn't mean safe. Big Rock Point in northern Michigan was 67 megawatts electric and a very highly polluting radioactively reactor because it was experimental and they broke fuel in the core. Small does not mean safe. And in fact, Holtec has proposed small modular reactors at the Palisade site. They're saying up to 4, which the site is only 400 acres. So I keep asking the question, if they're going to build 4 new reactors on that site and have the old zombie one operating, that's 5 reactors, more reactors than any nuclear power plant in the country is their vision.
Right.
Are they going to invoke eminent domain and take the state park to the north? Are they going to invoke eminent domain and take the resort community to the south? I think they might have to, just to have the space to do what they're proposing. And on the small modular reactor scheme at Palisades, Holtec has also applied to the Department of Energy for a $7.4 billion nuclear loan guarantee to fund design, certification, construction, and operation of 4 small modular reactors, all of which they want to build at the Palisades site. That's a grand total now of $10 billion at the Palisades site to this company. And the CFO, former CFO fired, Kevin O'Rourke.
No.
What his allegations are, more than $1 billion of inflating Holtec's books, hiding $750 million of expected losses, and another several hundred million in made up revenues. So he's alleging essentially $1 billion financial fraud that Holtec has perpetrated against Hyundai of South Korea in order to get its money, and has gotten it. So this is all breaking news as we speak in the last few months.
Well, Kevin, we're running out of time here. So do you think you have a chance at stopping this restart? There's a lot of money pitted against you, but you're on the front lines of it. What do you think your chances are?
We're going to fight it with everything we have. Yes, it is David versus Goliath for sure. But, you know, Martin Luther King would speak of truth crushed to earth will rise again. And the truth is being crushed at Palisades. We're doing our best to get the truth out. We're going to fight it with everything. We're motivated by protection of the Great Lakes and everybody who calls it home, which is, 40 million people who drink that water in 8 states and 2 Canadian provinces, and a very large number of Indigenous First Nations. So that's what we're fighting for. I wish we could have a bigger army behind us, but we'll fight this war with the army we have.
All right. Thanks so much for joining us. How can people get into contact with your movement? And do you have anything final for our listeners?
Yeah, our website is www.beyondnuclear.org. And to get in touch with me, my email is probably the best. It's kevin@beyondnuclear.org. And I would just say, wherever you live, there's probably a nuclear power threat near you. So be in touch, and I'll be happy to put you in touch with nuclear watchdogs in your area.
All right. Thanks again.
For a Green Future is also brought to you by the Wood County Park District. The Wood County Park District is a natural resources conservation agency. They protect natural spaces, maintain quality green spaces, provide engaging programming, and they teach people to love and respect nature. They also restore wildlife habitats and lead people on outdoor adventures. Wood County Parks protects natural spaces in Wood County for all to enjoy from 8 a.m. to 30 minutes past sunset every day of the year. There are several ways to get a hold of them and find out what's happening. One is to call them at 419-353-1897. Another is to visit their website, www.wcparks.org. The website again is www.wcparks.org. They are also available on all social media, Instagram, Facebook, Twitter, and many others. Just search for WC Parks. That's the Wood County Park District, and we're very grateful for their support.
Hello and welcome back to For a Green Future. We're hoping you'll update us on the latest developments in the ongoing saga of the Yellowstone bison. Could we start with your name and organization?
Yeah, my name's Stephanie C., and I'm co-founder of Roam Free Nation.
So the Yellowstone Bison Management Plan is being updated at the moment. Could you tell us what changes are proposed in that plan as compared to the way things are currently operating?
Well, it's interesting. There's actually more, the more you look at it, not a whole lot is changing with this plan. However, and this is just specific to Yellowstone National Park, they're putting forth a draft EIS, environmental impact statement, on a new bison management plan just for inside the park boundaries. One of the big changes, a very positive change in alternative 3, is the end to capture for slaughter, which would be a huge boon. And even though that is an option in alternative 3, which is the one we're supporting, the Park Service still says that they have the right to use that as a tool if necessary. So,
right, so there's 3 different alternative plans being presented, and each of them have different limitations on the buffalo herds. Is that right?
yeah. And you can find all of that on our website. It's the very first thing you'll see on our homepage at roamfreenation.org. But the first 2 alternatives don't do any favors for the buffalo at all. So we don't even really talk about them. And the big news is that the Park Service, the comment period deadline was September 25th, but they announced that they're extending it until October 10th. So if you hadn't had a chance to submit your comments, you still do. You have until October 10th. And you can find all the information to do that, talking points, the link to send in your comments right there on our homepage on our Take Action Alert at roamfreenation.org.
Do you have any theories on why this comment period has been extended? Is it because of public response?
It probably is. I'm sure they're getting a lot of feedback on this from both ends of the spectrum too. I'm sure the livestock industry is none too happy about especially alternative 3, but either way, it's good. It takes a lot of the pressure off, and it gives folks who hadn't had an opportunity to submit comments to still do that.
So there's still a lot of vital information missing from the public eye in terms of this plan. For example, we still don't know how many bison survived the rough winter we had last year, or the amount of bison killed by hunters each year. Is that
well,
correct?
We do know the number of buffalo killed by hunters this year, and over 1,700 were removed, over 1,200 through the hunt, so-called hunt, 80 plus moved through capture for slaughter, and then the remainder were removed for the quarantine, the domestication program. What we don't know is what the impact the winter took on the buffalo, the winter kill. The Park Service has just completed their summer population estimate, but they're not going to reveal those numbers to us until October 31st at the next interagency bison management plan meeting.
Which is after the deadline for public comment.
Yes. Pretty strategic on their part, but it should make for an interesting meeting.
Yes. Well, we'll hope to hear some good news at that meeting.
Yeah, we'll see.
Could you expand a little bit more about the third plan? You mentioned third proposed plan. You mentioned that this is the one that your organization supports, and it is the only one that deals with the problem of the hunters, the captures outside of the Yellowstone borders.
Well, it deals with they're one of the options in that alternative 3 is to end capture for slaughter operations entirely, which is something we largely, hugely, enormously support. It also puts an emphasis on natural selection. However, it also puts an emphasis on hunters taking most of the buffalo, which doesn't do natural selection any favors at all. So it's definitely not perfect, but it is the most significant, the most best move forward for this whole EIS. And, it's important that, so in a draft EIS, the Park Service has to respond to you. So you can ask a lot of questions and they have to respond to you. and it gets you standing if there was going to be legal action taken. You have standing in a court of law if you participate in this process. So even though it's not a perfect solution what they're offering, it's very important that people participate if they want to see any significant change coming down the line.
All right, thanks very much. How long have you been at this struggle? How long have the Yellowstone bison been oppressed, as it were?
They have been oppressed ever since they were discovered in the park. You know, I mean, they've been oppressed ever since colonizers first touched this soil. I've been involved with this issue over 20 years. And it's been an uphill battle for sure. We've had some small victories, but the playing field just changes all the time. And we're just really looking forward to a day when wild buffalo are treated like the wildlife who they are and respected and being allowed to just walk the earth like any other wild species should.
All right, thanks so much for joining us. Could you give us your information again? And is there anything finally you'd like to add for our listeners?
Sure. No, just please check out our website. On the homepage is the take action for this new management plan. It's at roamfreenation.org. You can also find us on Facebook and also on Instagram. And we encourage you to check us out, follow our work, take action for the buffalo. And we'll also be trying to help out other wild nature campaigns that are trying to defend the earth.
Yes. Thanks for coming, and we'll hope that Yellowstone chooses the right option here.
We hope so. We're going to try to make it happen. Thank you so much for having me on.
Thanks again for listening to that interview. Now, Rebecca, what is the Sinai Peninsula?
Yeah, well, it's a peninsula. It turns out to be mostly in Egypt, actually. I assume Sinai, Holy Land. No, it's mostly in Egypt. A little bit of it is in Israel. But yeah, I want to talk about this connection of Sukkot, the Jewish harvest festival, which is going to start Friday, the 29th at sunset, and end on sunset on the 6th, I believe, of October. Yeah, making it kind of ideal because, like, we're having people, listening on Saturday and some people listening on Sunday. So, yeah, the name means hut, Sukkot. It means hut, and the tradition is kind of like the creation of there's a traditional solstice feast, I believe, in Puerto Rico that you're supposed to have a little palapa, a little hut to eat it in. But in this case, it's connected to apparently besides the harvest, the 40 days in the desert of Moses when the ancient Hebrews were escaping Egypt. So, and apparently there's a consensus that pretty much the desert that they escaped through was the Sinai Desert in the Sinai Peninsula. But this is where it gets tricky because it's named the Sinai Peninsula because people think that there's this large hill, small mountain near the town of St. Catherine's, which is the Mount Sinai that Moses got the tablets from. Nobody is really sure. I mean,
right.
There's
hard to know.
Yeah, it's really, they don't know exactly, what mountain it was. It could be a completely different mountain. And of course, some people are going to speak up and say, but there's also no proof about the tablets, Becca. There isn't, but probably, there was something that happened to do with the mountain during the leaving Egypt.
Yeah, myths come from something.
Usually, yeah. Once in a while, not. But yeah. So they decided the whole name of this was going to be named after Mount Sinai, which that might or might not actually be Mount Sinai. So that's why it's called the Sinai Peninsula. But it's between the Red Sea and the Mediterranean, and is so yeah. It's famous for coral reefs down by the tip. There's a national park, and there's a resort you can stay in and go.
Those coral reefs might be hurting with rising ocean temperatures, though.
They might, yeah. There's that danger for coral reefs everywhere. The Egyptians like to mine turquoise from the Sinai Peninsula. Their name for it was turquoise place over there. That's
Translation wise.
yeah, basically that's what they cared. It's strangely triangular. It looks really weird because it's like it's connected by isthmuses to one leading to Africa and one leading to Asia. So it's just kind of hanging there, this giant triangular thing hanging from two little isthmuses, it looks like, off of those two continents. Like, you know, the two continents were parents and they had a kid between them or something. It's kind of cute. Yeah, the North Shore is basically the Mediterranean Sea. The southeast and southwest shores are on the Gulf of Suez and the Gulf of Aqaba on the Red Sea. So yeah, Suez is connected to. It's connected to Africa by the Isthmus of Suez that the Suez Canal cuts through, the famous Suez Canal, and the other one links it to Asia. I hope I got that right. Yeah, the East Shore is also the boundary between the Arabian and African continental plates. So that's interesting. And the big national park at the tip is called the Ras Mohammed National Park. Yeah, there's a little tiny bit of it, like maybe about a quarter of eastern Sinai is part of Israel, because there was a war. There was big famous war, stuff happened. Yeah, the inland, basically the peninsula and the desert are the same thing, because the entire interior is arid, mountainous, and sparsely populated. It's also the coldest province in Egypt because of the elevation and whatnot. Since we're an ecological show, so I looked at some issues. According to Peter Bruce Erie and some of his friends in northlandclimatechange.org, the peninsula has issues with deforestation, soil degradation, and desertification. There's a plan to address this called the Weather Makers Project. Not sure who's doing that, but involves greening, reforestation, soil conservation, and water management.
Weather or weather?
Weather. I think I said
who's making the weather? That's a weird name.
The Weather Makers. Yeah. Okay. Weather Makers.
Weather Makers.
Yeah, it's weather like in, weather outside weather. So, yeah, there's that. And also, they're concerned about the health of a saltwater lake called Bardawil, Lake Bardawil, which is a huge stopover for migrating birds, habitat for fish and other water critters, suffers from pollution, overfishing, and habitat degradation. I think that's what that says. Habitat destruction. Okay, that's what it is. Apparently, the whole peninsula, I think, is a huge global hub for global bird migration. Being it's centrally located between the continents and whatnot. Yeah. And a cooler Sinai could apparently moderate the weather for the entire region. So they're also going to do wastewater management is the plan, and reduced industrial pollutants. And okay, this is the interesting part. They're going to dredge to restore tidal flows with the Mediterranean. I can't remember if this is just that lake or like a whole bunch of places, little waterways.
I feel like it's hard to do a major environmental change like that and not affect the land somehow. So
yeah, like I read this and I was like, well, I've sort of read some things about dredging sometimes not being good.
Right.
And this is the thing, they're going to use the dredged materials to regenerate vegetation on land, quote unquote. So, I looked up the dredging generally. The benefits of dredging, according to frtr.gov, and a lot of people seem to second this, is the only real good ecological reason for it is that it removes contaminated sediments. But the thing is, if it's contaminated sediments, spreading it out on the land is a really, really bad idea. Because then they're just free to blow around in the air, get back in the water table, whatever they want. The sky's the limit. So, also, generally, it stirs things up in the water. Some escape in the process, obviously, of dredging the stuff up. And then where do you put it? Also, it creates a lot of noise that's negatively affects wildlife. And it physically just scoops things up, like, fish eggs, frogs, etc.
Yeah.
Also,
a lot of damage in the short term. And I guess they're hoping it'll be okay in the long term.
Right. But the thing is, silting up channels is a natural process. And animals are now using that silted up channel for stuff.
Yeah.
They're not going to be able to do that if you disrupt it and turn it back into something else. So, I mean, it's kind of like, up in Muskegon, where I'm from, they're always like trying to, hold on to the sand and the beach, which they need their beach, it's their major selling point for starters. And everybody loves the beach, but like, the natural process is for beaches to erode and go someplace else. Now, is there a case to be made for restoring it because like there's been worse weather because of global warming or something? Yeah, maybe. But yeah, either if they're going to spread it out on the land, then either that is a horrible idea if it's contaminated, and if it's not contaminated, they probably do not need to do that.
Right. If the major reason is contamination, yeah, it just seems like a cop-out that they're just putting it on the shore and hoping for the best.
Yeah, it's not going to be the best for sure. We already know it's not going to work. So, yeah, so that's what's going on in Sinai. It'd be interesting to know more about it if anybody does. Give us a call, give us a text.
Well, now it's time for our ecological news section. For our first story, we have a short report on the battery capacity of California's electricity grid from canarymedia.com. Over the past 3 years, from 2020 through May of this year, their battery capacity has increased by a factor of 10, from 500 megawatts to 5,000. Right now, battery stored power accounts for about 7.6% of the state's total normal energy demand. This is showcasing the best case scenario for solar power. During the middle of the day, the excess energy is being stored, and then it's being released back to the grid when demand is high. The progress here marks California's overall push towards renewable energy. The legislature there started looking at the possibility of battery storage back in 2010 and mandated big utility companies to have some storage in 2013. But happily, the utilities recognized the sense of having additional capacity on demand, and so actually exceeded the required numbers by about 4 times, well ahead of schedule. We're really happy to see that the largest economy in the U.S. is fully embracing the renewable energies that we already know are viable across the whole country. And we'll keep hoping for more good news on that front out of California. An interesting botanical story is next on the docket. With a history stretching back to the time of the dinosaurs. Back in 1994, a group of hikers stumbled upon an unidentified group of trees in Wollemi National Park, just 60 miles west of Sydney, Australia. Those trees turned out to be a living fossil of sorts, an ancient species nearly identical to fossils found from the Cretaceous period. There's now just 60 trees left in that grove under constant threat of extinction by bushfires. The genome for this tree, the Wollemi pine, or Wollemia nobilis, has just been fully decoded by scientists from Australia, the United States, and Italy. It has some very interesting genetic tendencies. These trees have an unusually high number of transposons. That's little bits of DNA that can change their position within the genome. It also means it has an incredibly high number of chromosomal pairs. In other words, the trees have a high chance of mutations forming naturally. Over millions of years and uncountable mutations caused by these transposons jumping around, there's been minor changes, such as the slightly wider needles as opposed to other conifers, and major ones like the change from sexual to asexual reproduction. The grove found in the modern day reproduces primarily by coppicing, something like that.
Okay, coppice is an architectural term. How did it become?
Might
is
also
it named
be.
after? Is it something that trees do?
In trees, it's where the tree reproduces new shoots directly out of the base. Is that
Huh.
similar in architecture?
I don't know. I don't know enough about it, so I guess I gotta maybe look that up.
Having such a volatile genetic code is mostly a detriment, at least in theory. For example, the same change that gives the Wollemi pine wider needles also seems to suppress its disease resistance. That's something that we could only have found out after we decoded their genetic code. Since this is such an interesting and unique specimen, cuttings have been taken and propagated by botanists worldwide. But the tree itself is critically endangered, so it's really important that the wild population continues to be preserved and protected. introducing new sources of mutations like radiation or chemicals, or new vectors of disease like illegally visiting tourists could spell the doom of a lineage that goes back 100 million years.
Also, we probably should try not to burn it down.
Yeah,
Australia
that would
having
be
had
nice.
problems with that lately. Australia's looking a little flammable the last few years, along with a lot of other things.
The research paper is still in preprint, so we'll see if peer review changes any of their conclusions. But it's a pretty cool insight into plant life back from the time of the dinosaurs.
Wow.
Kind of back when plant life was still figuring stuff out.
All right.
A little bit of a depressing, but not unsurprising report comes from St. Louis University researchers in Missouri, as reported by phys.org. While surveying a cave system that had been closed to visitors for 30 years, a research team headed by Dr. Elizabeth Hassan-Muller found significant levels of microplastics.
Ew.
Yeah, this particular cave, Cliff Cave,
Little
was
suckers get everywhere.
literally.
Yeah.
You can't get
Literally
away from it.
everywhere.
The cave was closed in 1993 by the authority of the St. Louis County Parks, and it was specifically chosen as a controlled environment to test for the intrusion of plastics or other contaminants.
Wow.
Hassan-Muller and her team found a large diversity of microplastics, with a higher amount being found near the entrance of the cave, where flooding was more likely to deposit them.
Like you'd expect.
Yes. The vast majority of the microplastics were also found in the sediment inside the cave, indicating again that the floodwaters brought microplastics in and left the particles there after receding.
Oops.
It all points to one thing: the microplastics are in the groundwater, as we probably knew but hoped they weren't. And the ecological harm they can do now that they're there is unmeasurable. Literally, research hasn't yet been done on the effects of microplastic in these deep cave systems or on the rare species that make underground water systems their home.
I can't believe that's positive.
No, I
Probably
would guess not.
cave systems are not like, yes, we could really do something if only we had some microplastics here. We have a great
Would be
ecosystem.
A very interesting evolution, if that were the case.
Yeah.
I guess we were all hoping it would never get that bad.
Yeah. It's pretty
But
bad.
the evidence continues to mount that microplastics are here for good. Previous research by Hassan-Muller and other groups have found that population density is the largest factor in determining where microplastics can be found in nature. So it's, of course, important for every individual in an urban area especially to consider their own ecological impact. If we can reduce our individual plastic bag or synthetic fiber usage, that was another large part of the contaminants, it might go a long way towards helping our planet survive. That's why it's so important to approach the green future from the ground up. There can't be meaningful change without our entire society changing for the better.
Very true.
Well, that's it here at For a Green Future for this week. We hope you'll join us again next week, where we'll have more ecological news and actions for you to consider taking.
Hear, hear.
I don't want no oil, a spoil in my shoreline. I like fish much better than crud. I like birds and things a creeping and crawling. Won't trade no more oil for blood. The sun done give us all we need to make this country run. But that black demon oil's got us fussing and fighting, and I do believe it's time we was done.